Hey guys, what is up? SuperKmanrocks here, and I am back for my LCS kind of round 1.5 overview and analysis video here. Obviously, we have already covered the winner's bracket version of round 1 here in the LCS. We covered our Team Liquid FlyQuest series, and we covered our CLG Cloud 9 series a couple of days back, but we have more games than that going on. We've got loser's bracket going on this weekend as well. So this is going to be a video detailing the two losers bracket round 1 series. Of course, I'm talking about the ones between FlyQuest, TSM, and then of course CLG and Golden Guardian. So if you guys are excited for that, let me know down in the comment section below. Let me know what you thought of all of these series. Obviously, I'll be going in depth game by game for both of the series, and then at the end I will be previewing the winner's bracket second round here between the quote-unquote top 4 teams right now. So if you guys are excited for that, let me know down in the comment section below. Let me know how you feel about all of these series. Let me know how you feel about all of these matchups, and if you are excited for them. But with all that being said, let's not waste too much more time. Let's go ahead and jump right into our first losers bracket series of the playoffs here in the LCS, and that is our 6-7 matchup here between FlyQuest and TSM. And this was an incredibly intriguing matchup, I think, on paper for me. I talked about this a little bit in my preview last episode, but I think this series is definitely being slept on as a competitive series. I think a lot of people would see how FlyQuest performed in the regular season, how TSM performed in the regular season, and see a really big gap between these two teams, but I think TSM got a ton better towards the back half of the year, most notably Spica and Chime. I think we're playing really, really good League of Legends towards the back half of the year, and then Solo has really stabilized in that top lane. I think this could be a more interesting matchup than people were giving it credit for, but my main matchup, my key matchup of the series was in the support position. It was Aframu versus Chime. I thought those two players were really going to dictate the pacing of a lot of the game here. Whether Johnson was able to get a lot of momentum and move into the late game in a good position, or whether Chime was able to link up with Spica and be able to create plays around the map. Both of them kind of have a little bit of a different play style, but support is definitely the most important role, I think, for both of these teams. So, very intriguing as a matchup, and let's just not waste any more time. Let's go ahead and jump right into game number 1 here, and game 1 was a TSM win. And I don't think a lot of people saw game 1 coming. This was a huge win for TSM. And I think a lot of people would talk about this being not a great draft for TSM, and I would relatively agree. Not nearly to the extent that I think a lot of other people would talk about. A lot of people are talking about this as like unwinnable, and I certainly don't think this is unwinnable. I always talk about the Zeri-Sivir handshake. Even if you do give up Zeri Yuumi, which I would not recommend, even if you do give it up, I actually think answering with Sivir Lulu is relatively fine. Again, Zeri-Sivir is one of those matchups where whichever one wins early is just going to transition harder into late game, and so if you can get a lead on Sivir, if you do want to put a ton of early pressure into that bottom lane and just go over and over and over and over again, it's still very unlikely that you're able to get a lot on Zeri, but if you are able to get a lead on Sivir, that's good. Like, that's really, really good. So, even if you're not able to kill her because, you know, the Yuumi just won't allow that, hopefully you're able to at least pressure her out and cause her some problems. I don't think it's the worst, and then people are talking about, not only did you give up Zeri Yuumi, but you also got counterpicked in the mid lane. And yes, Lissandra is a good counterpick to Ahri. I agree with that, and I've talked about it all year long. In fact, I've been very pro Lissandra all year long, but it's not like it's this dominant, unbelievable pick that's going to make Ahri unable to play the entire game. Sequoia certainly had opportunities here that he did not take advantage of. So let's talk about how the game was actually played. Spica just did such a good job in the early game on the Vi of making sure that Instinct was in a good position to be able to take over this game. Obviously, when you have a Zeri Yuumi on your team and you're the jungler, you want to invest in that lane. You want to be able to push forward with that because, you know, they're usually going to be able to make it worthwhile for you. And Spica definitely figured that out here. On the Vi into the Xin Zhao, a relatively okay matchup. Honestly, I would kind of favor the Xin Zhao, at least in the early trades here. I just think he has a little bit more combat power early on, but I get for the Vi, like, what you want to do here is just kind of focus the bottom lane, ignore a lot of the extra stuff. I think Jose probably was in a similar mind. Unfortunately, Spica just did it better. So, Spica's going to get my player of the game here on the Vi. A very good game in terms of overall map action, making sure that Instinct was able to get ahead. Once Instinct and Chime were rolling, then it was really, really simple. You could make plays in the jungle, obviously, catching out Sequoia a couple of times, making sure Solo was in a good spot against the Sejuani. You could just make sure that the entire map was kind of in a good state, and I think Spica did a good job there. Obviously, a lot of people have been talking about how Spica has been having a little bit of a down year. I have significantly pushed back on that idea, just because I really think that if Spica had better teammates around him, he would still be considered one of the best junglers in the league. He has shown that even with sometimes losing lanes pretty much all over, he can actively create wins for his team, and I don't get the argument that he's a bottom 5 jungler in the league. I don't get it. But he had a really good game here, and he kind of proved me right a little bit. Obviously, we'll see if that lasts throughout the whole series, but good for Instinct and Chime. Obviously, Instinct's been kind of hit or miss for this TSM team for the majority of the year since he got called up. I think he's certainly been their weakest player, at least in terms of consistency, but you put him on Zeri Yuumi, and he's going to have a good time, and so he comes out here and he does fine into the Johnson Aphromoo lane, really just gets given a lot of resources and does well with them, isn't bad with them, and I think that's really all you can ask from an ADC in this meta is, at best, just make sure that you use the resources well. You have Maple winning the counter pick in the mid lane, Solo in the top lane on a tank matchup, still winning pretty hard, but overall, it is what it is. TSM were just better by a considerable margin in this game 1, which I don't think a lot of people were expecting. As for FlyQuest, yeah, like I said, a lot of people hate this draft for them. I don't hate it nearly as much. I definitely think it's winnable, but they certainly did not play this well at all. Jose Deodo got completely out-pressured all the time. Like, honestly, on the Xin Zhao, you have to, when you pick this, you have to be aggressive early. You have to be trying to make plays. And when I see this draft, I see a team that really wants to invest in that Sivir. Like, a team that really just wants to basically camp 3 people bot and then move Ahri down when they can to get 4 as well. And just say, like, we're going to invest as much as we can into Johnson to get us to carry this late game. Because Xin Zhao's going to fall off. Ahri's, not going to be that much of a threat with the Lissandra. Really, it is up to Sivir to carry this late game. And they just didn't do that. Jose had a really, really bad early game. And it really cost him. Once you're on Xin Zhao and you're super far behind, like, your game is over. You don't have any damage. You don't have any tank stats. You don't really have any utility. Like, the whole point of Xin Zhao is to be able to fight early, and if he wasn't able to do that, that's not good. So he's going to get my dud of the game here in game number 1. But he certainly wasn't the only person on this team that wasn't playing well. I mean, Takuya had a really rough one. There's really no other way to put it. Obviously, I like Takuya. He was my first team All-Pro mid laner this year because I think, his contributions to FlyQuest are the reason they were in top 6 in the first place, but not a good game 1 here from Takuya. He picks the Ahri, a pick we know he can play, and I just don't know if he hit a single charm all game. Even on a stationary Vi, he missed. Like, I don't really know exactly what was happening with this game. Like, he didn't play all that well in the Team Liquid series either, got completely outplayed by Bjergsen. Hopefully this isn't playoff-itis, and, he's not, just succumbing under the pressure, because that would really suck, but this was not a good game from Takuya, and kind of follows up from a really bad series he had in the round previous. Like I said, Philip also got destroyed. Johnson and Aphromoo were supposed to be a thing that I think FlyQuest invested a lot in, but overall they just didn't, and into Zeri Yuumi, they're just not as proactive and not as good. Johnson loses that lane pretty hard, but it's what's going to happen. Instinct got a lot of pressure, and Johnson didn't, so it is what it is. But overall, a rough game for FlyQuest, a rough game 1, but not the end of the world. TSM, really great start to the series. This is exactly how you want to kick it off, because you put yourself in a position to at least carry some momentum into the next few games. Spica looks good. If Instinct can keep this up, obviously I'm not expecting them to get Zeri Yuumi every game, but it is still possible to carry this. So, are they able to do it now? We move into game number 2, and game number 2 is a FlyQuest win. And FlyQuest definitely bounced back here. A very, very good game from the bottom lane, and just in general, I think from the whole team. What I wrote down in my notes was this is a little bit of an opposite of game 1 in pretty much every single way. Not only did Fly dominate the game, but like in the ways that they dominated it, it very much felt like game 1 just flipped around, where I think TSM certainly has some questionable draft decisions here. Obviously, again, you get the Zeri Yuumi, that's great, but the Jarvan is just something I don't super understand. Jarvan, first of all, isn't all that good right now. His damage is super duper low, and he's not really all that tanky. He's really just the utility, the knock-up, and the Cataclysm. But outside of that, he really doesn't offer a lot of early pressure to be able to take advantage of the Zeri Yuumi lane like you were able to last game with the Vi. Obviously, a ton of junglers were banned in this game. You didn't have nearly as many opportunities, but you yourself banned Lee Sin, you yourself banned Viego, and you gave up Trundle. Like, Trundle would have been great in this comp, I think, for you, but wasn't really meant to be. And then on the flip side, FlyQuest did invest a lot into Johnson on this Sivir. Like I said, I do think the Sivir-Zeri handshake is relatively even, at least in terms of, I think Zeri will scale harder from even, but I think both can win early, and whoever wins early is probably going to get the lead. We've seen that multiple times throughout every region all year long. And they invested into bot lane, just like TSM did in Game 1. Johnson gets super far ahead here on the Sivir. Aphromo plays completely out of his mind on the Nautilus. He's going to get the player of the game for me. He was awesome on Nautilus this game, just some of the engages, the consistency to be able to tank a lot of the Zeri Qs and be able to get out on time. Like, a very good game from Aphromo, really setting Johnson up to be in basically a perfect position to carry the game. He was fantastic. And then, like I said, Jose Deodo did a really good job bouncing back from what was a really lackluster early game, kind of figuring out what he needed to do and go back to the basics. Just go bot lane, make sure your Sivir that's going to carry you in team fights is able to get ahead. You go to some more comfort picks, you go to Camille in the top lane, you go back to Ahri here, and Takuya still wasn't all that great hitting the charms, but he was a lot better in terms of the damage output in this game. Overall, I like what FlyQuest did here, even if the draft isn't all that different. I always say this. Draft diff is important, execution diff is significantly more important. Your draft is only as bad as the enemy team is good at, taking advantage of it. So, I just think FlyQuest played this game significantly better, especially Aphromo here. And Johnson definitely held up his own end of the bargain here on the Sivir. But for TSM, a little bit of a rough one. Spica definitely didn't have nearly the same kind of impact, but he's also on the Jarvan, and it's like, he tried, it didn't work because he doesn't really have any sort of actual impact on a champion like Jarvan. Like, the champion's just super weak right now, and I don't really see it being able to work out. Solo got clapped in the top lane here by Philip, and really it was more of a late game problem for Solo, but out of position all the time, not really timing his Mega Bar all that well. Not a good game from him. And then I'm actually going to give dud of the game here to Instinct in the bottom lane. Now, you may wonder why Instinct, he only went 1-2-1, but first of all, it shows up on tape that he just had no impact on this game. Like, he was not... It was a 4v5 this game. He did nothing on a really strong champion with basically the perfect setup. But even outside of that, like, even looking at the statistics and the numbers, he did less damage in this game than the 0-5 Gnar. That's really not good. He did less damage in this game than the 0-2 Lissandra in the mid lane. Not good statements to be made there. He just had no impact on the game. It looked like he wasn't even trying to play. And I get it. This has kind of been a problem for Instinct throughout the majority of the year, is he just plays so safe. Sometimes to the point where he is a net negative for your team. Not because he's dying and he's giving away gold, but because he's actively not trying to gain gold for your team in a super ADC-dominated meta where you as Zeri have to be able to carry these late games, and he just was never really in a position to even come close to being able to do that, so he's going to get my dead of the game, but it's not like anybody else on this team played all that much better. Solo and Spica definitely ran it a bit. Maple had no impact on the game. Like I said, what's Chime going to do if Instinct's not even trying to do damage? Overall, just a rough game for TSM. Definitely not the bounce back they wanted from the game 1 momentum that they generated, but overall, it's not the end of the series. You jump into a best of 3 now at 1-1. This can go anybody's way. Certainly a lot of interesting things to take away from both teams. Both teams have a little bit of momentum, and actually, I'll say there's a little bit of a substitution going into Game 3. Instinct is actually coming out, and Tactical is coming back in for TSM. Now, this is a big move, obviously. Tactical getting benched midway through the year because he just was really bad for TSM. He wasn't really all that better in Academy, but Tactical is somebody who historically in the LCS has been a very good playoff performer for Team Liquid, and it's something that if he can get back to some of that form that he had in 2020 where he was actively carrying Team Liquid in a lot of those playoff games, I think they're actually in a really, really interesting spot. So Tactical coming in for Instinct, there is a chance that this becomes their best 5, but obviously Tactical hasn't really been playing up to standards, even in Academy, in the recent weeks. So what happens here now that it's 1-1? What happens when we move into game number 3? Well, game 3 is a FlyQuest win. FlyQuest is able to take the 2-1 series lead in the series that they are supposed to be able to win pretty confidently here, and it's off the back of just a phenomenal game from the whole team. Like, really just from, and shout out to Philip, I don't want to sound like I'm, ragging on him, but he just wasn't all that important in this game. From jungle down to support, I mean, it was, everything that could go right went right for this team. Jose Deodo on the Wukong destroyed the map. I don't know how you can allow Jose to get Wukong. It's really been the only pick that he's been able to take over with in summer so far. He's been really dominant on it, but you leave it up. He's able to take it here, and he shows why it's been banned about him for weeks and weeks and weeks now, because he gets back on the monkey, and he's able to dominate the game, not only in the bottom lane, which he definitely is, being able to take advantage of that Draven, but just being able to 1v1 the Vi in the jungle and just destroy her and kill her over and over and over again. It's actually disgusting to watch. And then you also have the bottom lane. I mean, Tactical comes in, you immediately put them on Draven Pyke, which is super duper aggressive, and it's not even like you have a lot of things to support this. You've got the Akali, you've got the Vi, like, I don't really know if this is what I'd go for, but you go for the Draven Pyke, and it gets obliterated in the bottom lane by Johnson and Afromu. You know, Afro played Yuumi about as perfectly as you can play it. He was very close to my player of the game here. It's just really hard for me to give player of the game to a Yuumi player, but, you know, Afro was very close. He was essentially perfect in this game. Jose Deodo does get the player of the game, but, like, realistically, it's probably Afromu that deserves it in back-to-back games here. And Johnson's able to pick up on the scraps here. He's able to kill the Pyke over and over again, able to kill the Draven over and over again. He gets super-duper fed. I talk about this all the time. Draven's one of those picks that, if he does not get snowballed, is actually completely useless, because he's not even, like, 5-shotting people on the enemy team, and he just attacks too slow for it really not to matter, so it's not all that good if you're not winning. And unfortunately, jungle lost so hard that there was no pressure. Both the Wukong and the Lissandra were able to move bot lane and make sure that Sivir had a lot of gold. The Yuumi played fantastic, and Johnson was just able to take over this game, and it was never really all that close. Outside of that, Tactical, yeah, I don't know. It didn't look all that good bringing him in here. Obviously, it's kind of funny that they saw his final game on TSM Academy on that Draven, and they're like, yeah, that's what we should go to. But I really don't even think it's entirely his fault. Like, he doesn't play all that well, but it's just hard for me to blame him entirely. Spica completely ran down this game. Like, this is one of the worst jungle performances I've seen in a long time. From a player who just doesn't often have games like this, he's easily the dud of the game here for TSM. But you also draft the Akali in the mid lane. Like, this is not a Draven comp. A Draven comp wants to invest in that bottom lane, wants to do everything they can to make sure Draven can cash out. I don't like Draven Pyke. I think Pyke doesn't offer nearly enough stability for Draven to really make it all that worthwhile. I think other engagers are significantly better and are even better as a kill lane, because I honestly don't even think this is all that much of a kill lane, because you're just way too squishy. You're just way too susceptible to Wukong coming bot lane, and that's kind of what happened. And you know, I don't know. I just hate this draft from TSM. I think this is worse than FlyQuest draft in Game 1, in my opinion. But, yeah, not a good game. Jose and Afro obliterated this map. Spica and Tactical just got completely run over. Maple did fine on the Akali. He tried to get some kills back here. Was able to pick off Johnson a couple of times here in this game. But, I mean, really, how much does that even matter? Like, the kills on Akali aren't going to do anything when you have an 11-kill Wukong with a 25-assist Yuumi. And you still have a Lissandra that can just point and click on the Akali as long as she's not in Shroud. Like, it's not all that useful. And to add on to that, you still have a Jax in the top lane that's going to be split pushing. So, I don't know. I really don't like this draft from TSM, and they definitely got punished for it. Speak Up played awful, one of the worst games of the split, and FlyQuest did well to capitalize on a lot of those mistakes. But Game 3, a little bit of an anomaly, but it is now set point for FlyQuest. If they win one game now out of the last two, they are moving on to losers' second round here. Can they do it, though? Obviously, a pretty dominant win here in Game 3. Also in Game 2, do they carry that momentum and kind of do the TL thing in Game 4? They do not. TSM is actually able to pick up the win here in Game 4 and tie the series up at 2-2, send us to a Game 5. And honestly, a really, really fun game. And it's not your typical TSM game. Tactical still in here on the Sivir. You would look at this comp and you would say that they really wanted to invest in the bottom lane. It really isn't how this comp went. Overall, I thought Johnson did a really good job of being able to generate a lead early on the Aphelios. But it didn't really matter because he played it pretty bad towards the back half of the game. We'll get to that later, but let's give credit where credit is due on TSM. Where did they play right? These solo laners really took off. Solo and Maple both had very, very good games here in Game 4. You had Maple here on the Sylas, able to completely dominate a lot of this game. Not a lot of great ultimates to steal, but definitely some good ones. You love the Leona ultimate. You can really make use of the Camille ult. And, you know, depending on the situation, I think that Orianna ult can be very dangerous to actively deal with here. Obviously, you have to use it on yourself, but you have a lot of tools to be able to get in on the Sylas, especially if you use, you know, clever flanks and things like that. You're able to get yourself in a position where maybe you can hit on the Ori, maybe you can hit on the Aphelios, never really worked out in that way in the game, but still a very good game from Maple on the Sylas. This pick can dominate a laning phase and then also transition that into map pressure and into late game pressure. Sylas is such a good pick right now. I'm really surprised there aren't more people prioritizing him as the #1 mid laner in the game right now, but he is a very, very strong pick, and Maple definitely made use of him. Going into Ori is, relatively Sylas favored, just in terms of the fact that he pressures her out so much, and she has negative map pressure, especially compared to him, so overall, Sylas just has significantly more agency, I would say, in that lane, even if the early game kind of went FlyQuest's way. They just got to the point where they really had nothing to do. They had nothing to stop that Sylas. His healing was just too much, especially with Johnson whiffing all his ultimates. But he's actually not going to get my player of the game. Maple's not going to get it in the mid lane. It's going to go to Solo in the top lane, because what a Giga Chad game from Solo here. Obviously, all the memes about Solo coming in mid-season and turning TSM around are kind of true. Like, he's been very good, I think, for this team, especially considering kind of the black hole they had in the top lane for a majority of the year. He comes in here on the Gnar, a phenomenal game of Gnar here. Not only does he destroy Philip in lane with a little bit of help of Spica on the Wukong, but his engages in the late game. I was talking about him mismanaging his Gnar bar a bit in game 2. Definitely not doing that here in game 4. Some really phenomenal plays, basically to spoon feed some kills to Maple in the back half of this game. Really, really impressive stuff from Solo. I think purely just on how they played, Solo is going to get my player of the game here in game 4 on the Gnar. A very, very fun one from him. But Tactical stepped up. Wasn't really the focal point here. Didn't actually, do all that well in the early game. Like I was saying, FlyQuest had a little bit of a lead. Were able to get a lot of the objectives in the early game, mostly because they sent a lot of pressure bot. They wanted to make sure this Aphelios got ahead, and he was up like 50-something CS. Tactical did not quit, though. He didn't give up a lot of kills. He just had to give up pressure. And eventually, towards the back half of this game, Johnson started misplaying. Tactical was putting himself in better positions, and he was able to teamfight. Sivir is still going to scale, even if she's not, like, ridiculously ahead. So, overall, still a good game from Tactical, if not definitely not a perfect one. Chime did play really well here on the Rakan, especially towards the late game here with some of those engages, basically negating a lot of what this Trundle wanted to do in the late game. So, really, really like that out of TSM just in general. A good game. And then for FlyQuest, I don't like this draft. I really don't like Orianna mid. I've talked about this a lot. Takoya has his picks in the mid lane that he likes to go to. The LeBlanc, the Orianna, things like that he's always been a little bit more partial to. Neither of them are really all that good in the meta right now, and I think it's kind of starting to show. Ori just doesn't have any pressure into Sylas if you get to 15 minutes. Like, Sylas had gold, and, like, what does Ori do now in the game? He just completely nullifies her impact, so Takoya had no impact. Philip really started running it on the Camille, obviously. His signature pick here, that, his comfort pick, as we've called it all year long. He gets it here in game 4 and does not really capitalize on it. Not like it's entirely his fault, but he got outplayed by Solo. Definitely some pressure in the top lane from Spica. And then towards the late game, he just wasn't nearly ahead enough to be able to make a lot of the plays he was trying to make. He died super fast, pretty much on any engage. I think if he had more damage coming from his backline, it may have been better, but he didn't. He had no damage. Really, all the damage in this comp is coming from Aphelios. And like I said, Johnson, I think, missed every single ultimate that he threw out in this game on the Aphelios. Multiple times in this game, he was just way underperforming when it came to damage. In the late game, that's not the first time that this has happened in this year. Johnson sometimes just doesn't play the Aphelios all that well. There's really no other way to put it. And really, if you look at this comp outside the Aphelios, like, where is your damage coming from? It's not Ori. It's certainly not Camille if she's behind, so I don't really get it. Aphelios really has to be online here, and they did invest into him. He just did not pay them off. A bad game from Johnson, but at the end of the day, he was their only saving grace for a majority of this game, and he was up 50 CS in lane. I can't really give him the dud of the game, but, a better game from him, and they probably win this pretty easily. Unfortunately, where we're at now is that he had a really bad game, and Philip kind of ran it, and he had no backup, and so FlyQuest is on the losing end. But what does that mean for the series as a whole? Well, we're moving to game 5. TSM has a little bit more momentum, but even now, I think FlyQuest should still be the favorites to take this game 5. You look at this draft, it's a bad draft. If they get something a little bit more akin to what they got in game 2, what they got in game 3, I think they're in a much better spot, just a little bit more damage coming out of that mid lane spot. Either that or something a little bit more proactive, maybe the Talia or the Lissandra. I just don't think Ori gives you either. I think outside of that, hopefully you get a better performance out of your bot lane. For TSM, you just got to keep this up. Your solo laners really stepped up this game. Spica stabilized a little bit. Tactical is stabilized a little bit. You just really have to be, I think, a little bit more consistent, and you just have to get through, because I really do think that a lot of these guys can team fight super well. So what happens here in Game 5? Who is going to take this series? Who is going to be eliminated from the playoffs? The first team eliminated from playoffs in the LCS is FlyQuest, because TSM is able to take Game 5 here. A phenomenal win here for TSM. you've got to be super duper pumped. It wasn't them playing phenomenal all the time at the very least, but they certainly stepped up with a very unique draft. A lot of picks that I think are very much them. A lot of ADCs banned out here. We pretty much see every viable bot laner. Zeri, Sivir, Aphelios, Seraphine, Lucian, Draven, all banned. And so you're looking at a much different meta here in the bottom lane. Tactical pulls out the Xayah Rakan. Johnson goes to the Jinx here, both of whom I think are relatively playable. I think the Jinx is a little bit stronger, but Xayah Rakan is still a very playable lane and definitely can go into Jinx. It's really just a matchup-based thing here. You see the Aatrox Ornn top lane matchup. You see the Azir come out for Takuya for a little bit more stability. Aphromoo on the Tahm Kench. Overall, just two, like, not super meta drafts, but kind of fun ones here. And TSM just outplays it. Solo is a complete Giga Chad here on the Ornn throughout this entire game. Almost player of the game here for me on the Ornn. A phenomenal one from him, but you gotta give credit where credit is due. Tactical played super duper well in this game. And you can talk about him, you know, whether or not he should have been the one being subbed in here, but what a great game of Xayah from him. Basically perfect positioning. Chime did a great job, I should note, of setting him up for a lot of the things here, but he just outplayed pretty much everybody on FlyQuest. He's going to get my player of the game on the Xayah, and what a mid-set substitution for TSM to bring Tactical back in here. He basically wins them game 5, and that is huge. A great job from Tactical here. Good game from Spica as well. Maybe not perfect, but he really bounced back after what was a really bad game here earlier in the series. He bounced back in game 4 on the Wukong, had a really consistent good game, was able to be exactly where he needed to be. He goes back to the Vi, knows that all he needs to do is make sure that his laners can get ahead. This Ornn's going to be unkillable in the late game. Ideally, the Xayah is going to have a ton of damage in the late game, and they're not really all that tanky outside of Poppy Tom. Like, you can really beat up the Aatrox in the mid game if you are able to get on him, and I think a lot of things could go right here as long as you get your laners ahead, and I think Spica did a really good job of that, but really this comes down to Tactical doing all this damage, and Solo basically playing a perfect game outside of one missed ultimate, in which case, like, it's hard for me to even blame him because those interactions over the wall are so weird. Like, trying to hit Ornn ultimate through a wall and everything it's just very difficult all the time. Like, the way that the league, you know, the way that League kind of functions with that is just, it's not natural. If you're not super used to it, it can be bad, but Solo outside of that was basically perfect on the Ornn, and Tactical and Chime did such a good job. Overall, great game from TSM, a phenomenal bounce back, and really it was a lot of their new players that really stepped up this series. Solo, Chime played awesome, Tactical coming back in played really well, Maple had a good series, Spica got better. Like, it was a lot of, I think this is one of the more complete showings that we've seen from TSM all year long. As for FlyQuest, this absolutely sucks. You were in a good position to win this game. There's really nothing else to say. Multiple times throughout this game, Johnson was in a position to win team fights, but he played it bad. Like, there's really no other way to say it. Like, Johnson completely shit the bed in game 5 here. Multiple times where he's staring at Spica with like 100 HP right in front of him, and he's trying to switch to Rocket, but he doesn't have the mana, so it's auto-switching back, so he's not actually auto-attacking, and if he just auto-attacks, it's a free kill. Like, so many opportunities, I think, for Johnson to be able to snowball some games out of control, but just the small details were not able to come together for this FlyQuest team, whether it be Jose Deodo getting outplayed in the jungle, whether it be Johnson and Aphromoo really just not playing all that well and getting outplayed by Tactical and Chime in the bottom lane. Even if Takuya had a lot of gold in this game from being able to pick up some kills on the Rakan, on the Vi, it never really mattered. The Aatrox was never going to be able to get that flank into the backline because even the backline of TSM is super safe, so Aatrox's main goal really isn't all that achievable in this game. It's just, unfortunately, a lot of things didn't really go well, and it was a bad game from Johnson. You put a lot here on the Jinx. You know, you go to this kind of more, you know, less expected ADC matchup, less meta ADC matchup of the Jinx Xayah. You've got to be able to make that work on the Jinx. You're going to be able to do more damage late game. You have to get there, and Johnson just wasn't able to play it. So he's going to get my dud of the series here, or dud of the game, I should say. I don't do dud of the series in playoffs, but not a good game from Johnson. Honestly, not a good series from Johnson. I think you could say the same thing about Jose Deodo. Not all that bad from Deodo, but Johnson did not play well here. If there was a dud of the series, it probably would go to him. Takuya, like I said, tried his best, and it just didn't matter. Aphromoo didn't play all that well, Jose didn't play all that well, Philip didn't play all that well, and Johnson ran it down. I think with a little bit more damage, this could have been an interesting game, but TSM really had it in the bag. This was their game to lose, because FlyQuest certainly did not want to win. What does that mean for TSM? Well, who's the player of the series? My player of the series, shocking a lot of people, is gonna go to Solo in the top lane. I thought he was really, really good for TSM. He has been, like underratedly, like one of the best team fighters in the LCS, like full stop at any position since he came into the league, whether it be on the Ornn, which he's completely dominated team fights on. Like, I think he's undefeated on the Ornn, and it absolutely shows. He's actually like cracked on that champion. I don't know how you allow TSM to get that anymore. But even outside of that, the Gnar engages in Game 4 were genuinely phenomenal, even if he wasn't perfect in Game 2. I think Solo just played a really, really good series, and I think, for me, he deserves Player of the Series, so he's going to get that. But TSM just played well as a whole. Spica had a couple of bad games, but he bounced back. Maple played really well in Game 4. Tactical really stepped it up in Game 5. Chime was really consistent outside of the Pyke game. Overall, just a really good game from TSM, a really good series from TSM, and you got to feel really excited about them. I told you this team was a little bit underrated, and they did. They came out here and they beat up on FlyQuest. I didn't predict FlyQuest to win, but I certainly said in my predictions that I wouldn't be shocked if TSM was able to take out the series, and I'm really happy for this team because I think this iteration is definitely one to cheer for. Solo's a very likable player. I think Spica's very likable. Tactical's likable. Chime is super likable. Love Chime. So many people on this team that I'm really happy to see succeed. Obviously, it sucks for FlyQuest to be out of the playoffs now, but TSM moving on is a really intriguing matchup, and obviously we don't know who they're playing yet, but whoever it is probably going to be getting a harder competition than they maybe expected going into this round. All right, now we are moving on to our second Losers Round 1 series here. We covered the first one. We covered our 6-7 matchup. That leaves the higher seed and the lower seed to face off against each other in our second matchup here. It is going to be the 4-seeded Counter Logic Gaming taking on the 8-seeded Golden Guardians team here. And it's an intriguing matchup that honestly on paper really shouldn't be all that close. With how Golden Guardians played, especially towards the back half of a lot of this year, I think a lot of people have been talking about how 8 teams in the playoffs might just be a tad too much. They certainly didn't exactly play up to playoff standards towards the backstretch of the season, but they do end up finishing in 8th with a big win over Dignitas in the final week here, and they get their opportunity to face the number 4-seeded Counter Logic Gaming, who has been exceeding all expectations and really took Cloud9 to the limit in the upper bracket round 1 series. So CLG, definitely the favorite to win this series. I think a lot of people are considering them big odds-on favorites, but you never know in the playoffs, and it's definitely going to be interesting nonetheless. This Golden Guardians team was a lot better just a couple of months ago, so maybe they can get some of that form back, and that's all I can really hope for is they turn around a lot of what they didn't do in summer. So let's see if they can do that here, starting with our game number 1. And game 1 was a CLG win. They did take care of business here in game number 1, and it was pretty easy for them, quite frankly. Honestly, a very fun game to watch, and I would say that for a majority of this series. I know a lot of people really shit on the LCS for gameplay quality, and I like to fight back on that, quite a bit, but even when the gameplay quality isn't all that high, that can often lead to some of the most fun pro games that you can watch in pretty much any region, and I think the series is a great example of that. It wasn't always perfect in terms of game quality, but man, was it always entertaining to watch. CLG is able to take the first game here off of the back of some really good team fighting towards the back half of the game. Obviously, some Hextech Gaming going on. Hextech Gaming is always a blast. Hextech Dragon is awesome, and it really opens up a lot of different possibilities, a lot of weird ways to get in and get out, and create flanks and team fights and reposition, and there's a lot of weird, cool things that you can do with it, and both teams really tried to do a lot with it in this game. I highly recommend you watch it if you want to see some weird plays, good and bad overall from both of these teams. But when it came down to it, CLG definitely had a bit of a gold lead in this game. Not only did they get every single dragon and soul, but also I've never seen a team more scared of a Renata ult in my entire life. And then only to be hit by it, all 5 members. It's actually insane that this team was definitely prepping for the Renata ult, and it didn't even really matter, because Poom just played it super well. They all line up. He finally gets that one fantastic one to end the game. Luger does so much damage on the Sivir in this game. Not the best positioning overall, but, the bot lane was definitely the carry point for CLG. I've been talking about that for most of the year. You can talk about how Contracts and Dokla and Palafox have these games where they truly are sensational, and I do agree with that. They have a lot of games where they really are very good. Luger and Poom are the consistency, heart and soul part of this team that every game you can rely on to really step up and be really consistently fine for this roster. And I think Poom was really good in this one. He's going to get my player of the game on the Renata just purely for the impact that he had in the late game team fights. And then Luger is a very close second with the amount of damage he was able to put out in these late games with the Ricochet, with the Q on Sivir. But basically, everybody on CLG played well here. Contracts had some good moments, had some bad moments. Obviously, was able to turn around a lot of the game here in the back half just by securing a lot of the objectives. Palafox was fine on the Victor. Not really a huge fan of Victor Renekton as a pair of solo laners. I don't really think that offers you all that much versatility. Renekton's not something I'm a huge fan of anyways, and Victor I think is very weak in comparison to what you see a lot right now. And so not a huge fan of that, but overall it was able to work out for CLG. It's fine. As for Golden Guardians, you didn't actually play that game all that bad. Blaze Olive certainly had a lot of gold on him, and he was able to do quite a bit on Azir, but just wasn't enough. Some bad positioning from him towards the back half of the game really cost them. But you gotta give a lot of credit to this bot lane. Obviously, giving over Zeri isn't always ideal, but you still have to play Zeri well. And like I say, the Zeri-Sivir handshake can honestly be anti-Zeri if the Sivir does get ahead in the early game, which is what we saw from CLG here. Sivir had more gold going into the late game. Sivir was doing more damage, but Stixxay still played, I think, the game pretty well here. One of the better games that Stixxay's had in quite a while, and he's actually going to have a pretty good series. We'll talk about him here, but a very good game from Stixxay. He was the best performing member of Golden Guardians, in my opinion. And then Ole on the Janna. I've been talking about picks like this all the time throughout the year. Enchanters are really good right now, and I get it, we're really infatuated with the Lulu, we're infatuated with the Yumi, we're infatuated with the Karma. Like, these enchanters are something that we're really, latching onto, and we're like, these are the only ones we can play. But when they get taken away, I really don't see why picks like Janna, or picks like Soraka, just aren't all that viable right now. I think that they're very strong, and I would expect more teams to pick that up. We're way too late in the season for me to be saying something like that, but it's just kind of surprising to me that it takes something like this to see Janna get picked up, and honestly, I think Ole has a pretty good game on it. It's not the most impactful pick of all time, but it really enables Zeri to do a lot of what she wants to do. It can keep the Azir safe as well, and it's a lot of disengage with that ultimate, so some really interesting things from Janna coming out here. Ole played it fine, just not perfect. Really, where you're starting to look at some negatives here is River in the jungle, who just did not have any sort of objective pressure in this game at all. He's going to get my dud of the game here in game 1. I don't think the Poppy Trundle matchup is actually all that bad for Poppy. I know people call that a super bad matchup for Poppy. I really don't even think it's all that bad, but you still got to be able to get objectives. And like I said, Hextech Gaming, sometimes you just tried to be a little bit overly fancy and ended up not smiting at the right time, and Contracts did a really good job of making sure to secure a lot of the objectives in this game, make sure that basically Golden Guardians had none, and a lot of that, in my opinion, was on River. Even if Golden Guardians was in a good position to get some of these, they were never actually able to get them. So River's going to get my dead of the game here. He didn't play all that well on the Poppy outside of that either. Not really a great comp for Poppy to go into. You typically want to see a little bit more versatility when it comes to Poppy, but Victor Renekton isn't exactly, the exact Poppy matchup that you're looking for. But overall, it's fine. It's not the worst loss in the world. Licorice didn't play all that well in the top lane, but honestly, he wasn't that bad either. He kind of won early game, but it's Ornn into Renekton. Like I always say, it's such a generically neutral matchup, I think, for both parties. If you invest in the Renekton, he can win. If the Ornn gets some good engages early on, I think he can win. It really is kind of neutral, in my opinion, so it really is just a little bit of a player diff, and I don't think either of them played all that well in the laning phase, so I don't think it really mattered. But in the end, Golden Guardians was not able to take the game, even with the Blaze Olive having gold, Stixxay positioning well, a good Janna game. It just wasn't enough to be able to beat up on Poom's killer Renata ults towards the back half of the fight, Contracts securing every objective, and the infinite amount of damage that Sivir can put out from ahead. So CLG is able to take this game number 1, but are they able to continue that momentum now moving in to game number 2? And game number 2 is a Golden Guardians win, and I think that's going to surprise some people here. They're able to pick up a Game 2 win here over CLG. Not a lot of people even predicted them to take a game. I was certainly one of them that did not predict them to take a game, but they looked really good in this one, off of a lot of different things. First of all, let's get the elephant in the room out of the way. Yes, Zeri was in this game with an Enchanter, and yes, Zeri got another Penta. It happens. I hate this champion. I think she definitely needs nerfs, but at the same time, I'm not going to completely destroy CLG's drafting process just because they gave away Zeri. Remember, there have been a lot of teams in the playoffs so far that have given away Zeri and have been able to beat it pretty cleanly. Obviously, it's not quite as simple as that, but it's not like Zeri is just some unbeatable pick. It's from ahead that Zeri becomes genuinely really disgusting, but you can get Zeri behind in the early game. Zeri unfortunately did not get behind in the early game, though, in this game, as Stixxay was really able to just take over the entire map and take over the game. Easy player of the game choice here for Stixxay. He played well in game 1 on the Zeri, just wasn't really able to match the Sivir damage because Sivir got ahead. In this game, a little bit of a flip. Zeri's able to get ahead in the early game, and Sivir is simply just not able to match the pressure that Zeri can not only put on the lane, her lane opponent, but around on the map. Like, being able to move around, go mid lane, and be able to fuck up Palafox's lane. Go into the jungle and be able to mess up contracts. Like, there is so much that Stixxay is able to do in this game that it really is just Zeri versus the world. And obviously, Lulu helps a lot with that. Being able to keep Zeri alive, put Zeri in a safe space, and be able to speed her up, give her shields, whatever, even damage that Zeri is, needing. You also have the Taliyah in the mid lane to be able to roam and make plays. I thought River played the Jarvan really well in this game. I talked earlier in this episode about how I think Jarvan is a relatively weak jungle pick just overall in the meta right now, but River plays the Jarvan really well. It's clearly a pick that he is very, very comfortable on. And if you're going to be able to flex Poppy into the top lane and be able to win as hard as Licorice did in the top lane, I think that the Jarvan pick is fine here. This is a double flex, obviously, because Jarvan can go top. If they really wanted to play Jarvan into Aatrox, that is certainly a playable matchup. It's just not all that ideal. So, moving the Poppy up top there, I think was a really good decision. River played the Jarvan well. Overall, a really fun draft from Golden Guardians, and they executed on it well. But at the end of the day, Zeri is just going to do Zeri things. And game 2 went Zeri's way. Stixxay did play it well, but obviously that champion is Giga busted. As for CLG, not a great game here. I don't even think it's all that bad of a draft. You still handshake the Sivir Zeri agreement here, which I think is perfectly fine for CLG. They showed in game 1 that they're happily able to win on that if they invest in it. Poom didn't play nearly as well, though, in the support position here. The Renata is taken away. He goes to the Nautilus for a little bit more, actual pressure. But the problem with that is, if the Zeri plays well, you're just really never going to be able to aggress in lane. You're going to have a lot of pressure out of lane, but in lane, it's going to be a little bit of a problem, especially before you hit 6, and we definitely saw that. River and Blaze did a lot to be able to get Stixxay online before Poom was really able to do anything about it on the Nautilus. So, Luger and Poom definitely get behind, and from that point, basically, the game is over. I also want to point out Dokla in the top lane. He did not play all that well here. Definitely got outplayed by Licorice. And that's a little bit concerning. Dokla Licorice was my key matchup of the series when I previewed this in my last LCS episode. Dokla definitely needs to step up. He's someone who can play really aggressive and play these, strong picks. The Akali, the Yone definitely are things that I think a lot of people know Dokla for. He goes to the Aatrox, which can be relatively aggressive here, but just gets outplayed by the counterpick. Poppy here is flexing that into the top lane, and really there's not much he can do at all. He doesn't really have any aggression. He doesn't really get himself involved in any plays around the map either. Just overall, it's not the worst game in the world from Dokla, but, it's definitely a sign of bad things to come if Licorice is going to be able to basically just outplay him in lane like this. That was something I was definitely worried about when it came to CLG. Dokla's going to get my dud of the game here for CLG. I think you could realistically give this to Poom as well. Like I said, no real impact on the Nautilus until later in the game, but at least later in the game, he did have some impact in some of these team fights. I don't think Dokla did at all, at any point in the game. Contracts did play well. He definitely had some moments where he was getting some resets on Viego, but overall, Viego's just not the kind of carry that he used to be in the meta. He doesn't have the same kind of damage where, he can just keep getting these resets and he can win you team fights by himself when he was at his most OP in the meta. He's just kind of a fine jungler right now that has some early pressure, has some late game potential, but doesn't really do anything all that perfectly. There's a reason I've been telling people not to pick the Viego throughout the season. It's just because I really don't think he's all that right now. But overall, I don't hate CLG's draft. They just weren't able to execute on it. Like I said, when the Zeri gets ahead, she's basically impossible to stop from snowballing out of control. Very similar to something like Draven in that respect, but Zeri's just a little bit better from even. So overall, a really good game from Stixxay, and I don't imagine CLG is going to want to give that Zeri over again for quite a while, but good for Golden Guardians. They tie the series up at 1, basically going into a best of 3 now with CLG. It's not like CLG is the most consistent team in the world. We know that they're able to drop games. They're hyper-aggressive. Players like Dokla, Contracts, we know that they have some of these games where they can just run it. Golden Guardians is certainly not out of the series, and they definitely showed that they have some avenues to winning, especially if Stixxay is going to step up and play like this against his former team here. So what's going to happen now as we move into game number 3? Game 3 is a CLG win. CLG is able to take control back of the series here, mostly because of some really good macro play out, just in general from CLG. Definitely some good and definitely some bad. We'll talk about CLG first. Contracts played this game really well on Poppy, at least for the most part. We got to talk about Contracts is really interesting because he has some of the best Poppy positioning and gank ability of anybody in the LCS. His ability to hit stuns consistently on key targets like Stixay in this matchup were really, really incredible, but man, I've never seen someone hit such good Poppy stuns and then do such bad Poppy ults. I don't think he realizes that he can cancel it just to knock people up. I think he thinks he has to chuck them out of the fight, and sometimes he actively cost his team some kills, actively saving Golden Guardians in some situations. But outside of that, like, he was really, really good on the Poppy. Good enough to get my player of the game here in Game 3. Really, really good game overall from Contracts. When he plays like this, it is very difficult for CLG to lose, because when Contracts wins, CLG is just in such a great spot, because you know this bot lane's going to be hyper consistent. Again, they pull out the Sivir here. They do ban the Zeri, which makes me shocked to see Golden Guardians not respond with the Sivir ban, but Golden Guardians gives over the Sivir with the Karma, and you go into the Twitch, and I really just think this is super duper CLG favored in terms of a matchup. Luger is able to punish that early on. Karma has so much pressure in that lane that Twitch is just not going to be able to answer. I think Golden Guardians wanted to trade that for early game pressure on the top side, because you go for the Renekton, you go for the Volley Bear. A pretty good combo for early topside pressure, and they did try and successfully try to get pressure on Dokka on this Aatrox, but it didn't really matter when the bot lane lost so hard. This is a bot lane focused meta. Sivir got ahead, and the game just kind of spiraled out of control. Contracts did a really good job of making sure the Ahri was included in a lot of plays, and that the Sivir had gold. Karma was keeping everybody protected by the time we got to the mid to late game. Even if Golden Guardians had gold, which they did, even on something like the Twitch, it just was never going to be enough, with Contracts basically stopping anything from happening at that moment, and the rest of your gold being on Licorice's Renekton, and he's just not going to be able to take over the game. So, a little bit unfortunate here. Dokka didn't play all that well for CLG. Outside of that, I thought everybody on this team played really well, and they had a good game plan. They had a good strategy. They knew exactly where they wanted their gold to go, and they got it there, so I think they executed on it well. As for Golden Guardians, I don't know, like, this comp is good and bad. I like the idea of playing around a Renekton Volibear topside. I think Volibear is a little bit overhated on. I don't think he's all that great, but I don't think he's all that bad in the meta right now at pro play either. I think really the thing with Volibear is he's kind of like a proto Xinjiao, just a super ganker. Like, he's like what Elise used to be, where you want to get that level 3 gank off, you want to get that level 5 gank off, you want to be able to invest in your lanes early, because you're just going to eventually become full tank, and then you're not really going to have a ton of pressure to be able to gank these lanes. So you really want to be able to maximize your ability to fight early, and I think he tried to do that in the top lane, was able to get Licorice quite a bit of gold on this Renekton. Doesn't hurt that Licorice outplayed Dokka once again here in the top lane. A very good game from Licorice, but it just is a little unfortunate that you put all your pressure into that basket while Contracts was somewhere else on the map, being able to make sure that Luger had gold, Palafox had gold, and that they were moving into the late game in a good spot. Eventually, you do get some situations where Twitch is able to trade back, but Contracts plays it too well at the end of the game. Stixay doesn't really have any outplay potential because he's just too, like it's really hard to play as Twitch if the Poppy is good. And then a Blaze Olive really, really shits the bed towards the back half of this game. He's going to get my dead of the game here on the Lissandra. Some really, really bad ultimates in the back half of the game, obviously. There are certain situations where you want to ult Ahri, but it's not like just auto ult Ahri. Like, it's not just as simple as that, right? Like, there are situations in which you can go in full ult yourself for big combos and be able to try and pull that off. I just think he played it a little bit too safe, gave Contracts too many opportunities to be the aggressor, and if CLG was the one getting the engage off, they were often the ones being able to finish and win the fight. So, like I said, even if Licorice did play well in this game, because I do think Licorice did play well and did play better than Dokka in this game, like, what's the Renekton truly going to do to be able to turn this game around? So, overall, not a great game, and not a great game strategy, I think, overall from Golden Guardians. It's not that I hate the draft, although I don't love it. I don't love handshaking. Like, I don't love you giving away Sivir only to answer with Twitch. I certainly don't think that's great. I don't love the early priority on Renekton. I certainly don't think that's great. Just overall, I think there are a lot of better things that you can do in a situation like this, and I don't think they did it. But at the same time, it certainly was a game plan execution difference as well, because CLG knows that once Sivir gets ahead, the game is over, and I guess Golden Guardians just didn't realize that, and they just let the Sivir get ahead. So unfortunately, CLG was able to take that game 3. We're moving into game 4, though, and game 4 could be the end of the series here. This could be done and dusted, all wrapped up for CLG here if they are able to take it. So can they take game 4? They cannot. Golden Guardians actually take game 4, and what does that mean? We're getting 2 best of 5s here in this video. 2 5-game sets, 2 silver scrapes. A long day here of LCS action, but it's definitely worth it because what a fun day it is. Licorice continues to gap Dokla in the top lane. A great game from Licorice on the Poppy. They go back to this interesting draft strategy where they know they can flex the Poppy and the Jarvan depending on the matchup that they want to get. In the top lane, they go back to Licorice on the Poppy here into the Ornn. Kind of a tank versus tank matchup, but Poppy is so aggro in this lane, or at least Licorice plays it so aggro that he's actually able to get a consistent lead and be able to translate that into some killer good team fights. We know how Poppy can take over the game in the mid to late game, especially against something like a LeBlanc or a Wukong that really suffer against the tankiness of Poppy and really just the kit of Poppy in general. Licorice does a really good job of being able to do that, so much so that he's actually going to get my player of the game. He's been very good in this series. Even when this team loses, Licorice has been consistently outclassing Dokla, which is really good to see for Golden Guardians. I talked about this in my key matchup for the series, where a lot of times Golden Guardians' win condition is just, can Licorice not run it? And when he's been good for this team, they've often won. That's what was happening at the beginning of the year, when they were actually a pretty good team competing for that, like, 6th place spot. A lot of that was because they were putting Licorice on these more aggressive picks, things like the Fiora in the top lane, and he was really paying off for them. But in the mid part of the season, when he really started to struggle a bit more, I can definitely see why they lost confidence in him. They go back to that a little bit in this series, and he really is paying off for them. He's been very good. River was also great in this game on the Jarvan. Like, you have to respect him, because Jarvan overall I don't think is all that strong of a pick, but River is making it look like it is a strong pick in the meta right now. Very good game from him. You see the Zeri Amumu lane come out. I really don't like this lane duo at all, but when you're better, again, when you play it better, it doesn't really matter. And like I said, River had more pressure in this game than Contracts, and so Zeri was able to get that lead over Sivir in the handshake matchup, which means that the Feast or Famine pick of Amumu ended up feasting a lot for Golden Guardians in this game. A lot of really good engages that were never really all that punishable, because the damage coming out from the backline on the Zeri and then the follow-up from the Sylas was just super good. And then Jarvan, Poppy, like, you have so many tools here if the Amumu ult lands and you're in a good spot to follow up, to be able to actively just end the team fight very quickly with a nice wombo. So overall, good game from Golden Guardians, exactly what you want to see in a do-or-die game 4. Great game from Licorice, a great game from Stixxay, great game from River. I think they all kind of stood out and played really well in this game. As for CLG, definitely not ideal to see a loss in game 4. You definitely wanted to see this team be able to, like, handily take care of Golden Guardians, a team that, quite frankly, has been struggling, but the problems that CLG has been having are really being exacerbated in this series, which is the consistency of the upper half of their map, whether it be Contracts not being able to consistently beat River, who just quite frankly has not been all that good this year, even on Dignitas. Going to Golden Guardians, it didn't really matter. He really wasn't all that good in summer. And then Dokla not actively being able to even compete with Licorice in terms of, like, going even in pretty much any matchup. This is a tank matchup, and he was down in a bunch of CS. Overall, not all that good. Not nearly the same kind of game impact towards the back half either. And then Palafox. Obviously, you pull out the LeBlanc here, a pick that I'm just generally super low on. But you pull out the LeBlanc into Poppy Jarvan. Like, I get that you can maybe trick the Jarvan a bit, but you go for some tower dives in the mid lane onto a Sylas. They do not go well. Some of the worst play I've seen all year long in that respect. And you just kind of throw away any chance you have of being this dominant late game assassin threat that can, you know, blow up the Zeri or blow up the Sylas or anything like that. By basically relinquishing your early game lead. And so Palafox is going to get my dead of the game. Not a good game from him at all. He has these games, sometimes I talked about this, like, Dokla's over-aggressive and can throw away leads. Contracts is over-aggressive and can throw away leads. Palafox is over-aggressive and can throw away leads. And unfortunately in this game, it was the mid laner. But it wasn't, I mean, the whole team just kind of didn't play all that well. I talked about how Zeri and Amumu were really strong and able to get that lead in the early game because of intervention from the Jarvan. It wasn't really all Luger and Poom's fault. They just kind of got outnumbered in the bottom lane, really, as their team didn't really react in the same way that they should have. This is a pretty obvious, like, bot lane skirmish meta right now, and I just don't think that Contracts really played towards that bottom lane nearly as much as he should have. Played towards the mid lane LeBlanc, which I don't think is nearly going to scale as well. It definitely frustrated me, but at the end of the day, it is what it is. Luger and Poom didn't get all that destroyed. Unfortunately, Stixxay and Ole just outplayed them in this game, mostly because of a lot more team intervention, and what that basically meant is Zeri gets online and Zeri ends the game. So overall, a little bit of a rough execution game here from CLG. Definitely some weird plays. This was winnable for them, but I guess you could have said the same thing about Golden Guardians in Game 3. GG is able to pick up a huge win here, though, in Game number 4, which sends us to a Game number 5. Can Golden Guardians actually pull off the miracle here and actually have both of the lower seeded teams in losers bracket pick up wins here. We saw TSM win earlier in the video. Can Golden Guardians be the second team to do it? They cannot. Unfortunately, CLG is able to pick up the game 5 here. Win-loss, win-loss, win for CLG. They've got to be happy about that, and obviously, you've got to be happy about CLG being able to take care of business, but it really should have never been this close. I will say, Game 5 was a complete and utter stomp. Like, this was CLG from minute 1. They were up 15k gold. Like, there was never a moment in this game where it looked like Golden Guardians had any sort of opportunity. Even if I don't hate their draft, I certainly don't love it. Obviously, another Sivir-Zeri handshake, except for the first time in the series, it's flipped. Luger getting Zeri, 6A getting Sivir. You bring out the Azir to be able to maybe offer a little bit more pressure in the late game, but you're going into Akali, so she's going to offer a lot. You've got the Nautilus and the Viego and the Ornn, just very passive picks. You definitely want to see something more positive out of Licorice, who's been able to win lane every single game of the series so far. Don't love the draft from Golden Guardians, but CLG was able to capitalize on exactly what they did here. You draft the Trundle into the Viego, you're going to have significantly more early game pressure in that respect, and Contracts took advantage of that. Going mid lane, making sure Palafox got a bunch of leads. Going top lane to make sure Dokla was in a good spot. Going bot lane, I mean, Poom had 19 assists in this game, like, unreal here to make sure that they were in a good spot there. Contracts played the game really well, but, you know, my player of the game has to go to Palafaker here on the Akali in the mid lane. Some really, really stylish plays being pulled out here. Even if he wasn't the most, like, impactful on the map of anybody in the game, that was definitely Contracts, and I think you can make a real case Contracts was the player of the game here. I think that Palafox still played really, really well in this game, and he was a little bit more flashy here on the Akali, a lot more fun plays, was able to take out a Blaze Olive a couple times, basically by himself, and that was a lot of fun to watch. So Palafox is going to get my player of the game here, really, really fun, but CLG just decimated them. There's really no point in talking about, like, this game in heavy depth. Like, there's really not a lot I can tell you. Palafox played really well, Contracts played really well, and then the rest of the team, like, just dominated all their lanes. Like, bot lane won hard, top lane won hard, mid lane won hard, jungle won hard. Everybody won hard on CLG. As for Golden Guardians, everybody lost hard on Golden Guardians. Licorice is going to get my dud of the game here on the Ornn. It's not entirely his fault. Once you lose pretty hard to Renekton, it's not all that smooth. It's not going to be even smoother from that point onward. Obviously, Ornn does scale, and you could theoretically get to a point in the game where you are relatively fine, but just as Ornn, it was never going to happen here. Like, Akali was able to two-shot him, and that's a problem. And that's not even including the fact that Trundle can steal his tank stats, and that Zeri basically one-shots him at that point, so there are so many things that could go wrong for Licorice in this game, and they did. I don't like them putting him on Ornn duty in Game 5 when he has been winning lane every single game in the series, but it is what it is. You also pull out the Viego, which is overall a very weak pick in my opinion. Don't love that from them either. Obviously, heavily invest into the jungle position from CLG here. They take away the Trundle, they ban the Jarvan, Poppy, Vi, Wukong, but I still don't think Viego is all that good here. Maybe investing earlier into the jungle would have been a little bit more fruitful for Golden Guardians. And then ABO just got completely outplayed. Not only in this game, but in the series as a whole. If there was a dud of the series, it would probably be a Blaze Olive for me. But, you know, unfortunately for Golden Guardians, they weren't able to get it done. That ends their season. I think a lot of people are going to be, you know, happy to see CLG move on, but this Golden Guardians team performed a lot better than anybody gave them credit for. I don't think a lot of people expected them to even be able to take a game off of CLG. Instead, they take 2, and really were in a good spot in Game 3 to maybe even have won the series in 4, so props to Golden Guardians. I think they drafted really well overall in the series. A lot of interesting things here. Good on Licorice to be able to win a lot of these laning phases. Good on 6A and Ole. I thought they played relatively well. If they had a better jungle mid duo, they definitely were in an opportunity to win this. But River and a Blaze Olive just simply weren't up to par today. So unfortunately, Golden Guardians is knocked out. But as for CLG, they're going to be very, very thankful that they were able to move on in this series. It wasn't nearly as clean as they wanted it to be, but a win is a win. My player of the series is going to go to Poom in the support position. I think a lot of people are going to want to give it to Palafox or Contracts, and I understand that, but I think Poom was actually really, really good for CLG here today, whether it be in that Game 1 or here in the Game 5. I think he really took over the map a lot of the time. Even in the matchups where they lost, he had a significant impact, at least on the game. And going into a 6A Ole lane that generally was able to win, I think it was fine. Really, the only games where he wasn't all that great were the Nautilus ones, but even on those, like, you can only play Nautilus so bad. He was still having some really good hooks. So Poom was my player of the series here for CLG, but overall, they've got to be very, very happy to move on to the next round. If they would have lost to Golden Guardians, that would have been an absolute disaster for what has been, quite frankly, a miracle season for Cloud9. But they now get a chance to, you know, redeem themselves. They're going to be playing the loser of TL and 100 Thieves in the losers round 2, and that's certainly going to be an interesting matchup. I'll obviously detail that whenever we know who's going to be playing there, but, you know, good for CLG. Congratulations to them moving on. You would have wished it to be a little bit more clean, but a win is a win in the long run. All right, now that we've finally completed our losers bracket round 1 reviews and overcaps, we had 10 games to go over. It's the most I've done in any of these videos for any region so far this year, at least in one video. We finally get to move on now to our previews for the upper bracket round 2. So this is going to be our 1 and 2 seats that had a bye, taking on the 2 seats that won in the upper bracket in the first round. And that means we get to kick it off with our 2-3 matchup here between 100 Thieves and Team Liquid. And this one is a blast to look at. This is going to be a lot of fun to talk about. Really interested in how these two teams match up against each other in particular, because I really think that these two teams have a really, really competitive matchup, probably the most competitive matchup of any two teams just in terms of lane to lane. And I can kind of go through that right now. We can talk about the top lane matchup first. I think you can make a real case these are the two best top laners in the region. I would. I know I put Fudge on my second team All-Pro for Cloud9, but, you know, I think Fudge had a better year, but I'd rather have Whippo kind of thing. So, Someday versus Whippo is certainly going to be an interesting matchup. Someday obviously likes to go to a little bit more of those passive picks, especially with how Closer and Abadage like to play with those more aggressive roaming styles. You want Someday on something a little bit more consistent. Whippo, on the other hand, likes to go for these ego blind picks. Absolutely something I can see Someday taking advantage of. Whippo obviously going to the classic Olaf a lot this year. Well, let's not forget what Someday's best champion is. That reworked Aatrox is dominant for Someday, and I think I don't know if Whippo is going to be wanting to pull that Olaf out too many times in a blind pick scenario in this matchup. We've already seen Philip be able to destroy him on it. I can't imagine what Someday would be able to do on his best champion by a considerable margin. So that matchup is certainly going to be interesting. I don't think a lot of top laners can touch Someday right now, but if there was going to be anyone, it is going to be Whippo. The jungle matchup is incredibly interesting between these two teams. You've got kind of the carry jungler in Closer versus the more supportive in Santorin. But Santorin certainly had a better year. Closer had a very down year, in my opinion, for 100 Thieves. He was not a focal point for what this team did, and was certainly not a focal point for a lot of their wins. But he is a good player. Obviously, a former MVP in the league, one of the top junglers for quite a long time now in the LCS. It's just about, can he be getting his form back here in the playoffs? Santorin's definitely going to be more consistent. I think he links up with his mid laner in a way more consistent manner, which helps him a lot. But Closer definitely, I think, has more talent. What Closer really has always done well is be able to take advantage of early game pathing. His pathing is essentially perfect. And if he's able to, you know, counter jungle Santorin and put Santorin behind and maybe put himself in a good position, I could actually see this matchup being a lot more interesting. But in the mid lane, you've got Abadage Bjergsen. Certainly an interesting matchup. I think both players have kind of had, you know, down, quote-unquote, years from what people were expecting, even though I think Bjergsen's been a lot better than people have been saying. To me, this is very much Team Liquid favored. Abadage's been getting much better in recent weeks, but there have been multiple times throughout the season where I've thought Abadage, like, needs to seriously consider being benched. Like, there are moments where he is just not good. Like I said, he has been getting a lot better, especially towards the back half when 100 Thieves really started to put the pieces together, but he's not the guy he was last year. He just simply isn't. I think if Bjergsen kind of gets on some of these late game picks that he's been a little bit more successful on, most notably the Swain, I think Abadage could definitely have some problems being able to match that kind of impact in the late game, but it is something we're going to have to look out for. And then you have the bot lane. You've got FBI, Hansama, one of the more mechanically interesting matchups that you're going to be getting all playoffs long. FBI, you could make a true argument, has been the best AD carry in the region, maybe outside of Danny. This year, Hansama should have been that, but he just wasn't. He really underperformed for a majority of this split. He was someone who I was like, I don't even know if he's top 4 in terms of AD carries right now. He wasn't even remotely in my All-Pro voting. So, what does that mean for this matchup? Well, if Hansama is on, he's probably the better ADC, but he just simply has not been that all year long. So, I really think a lot of this matchup is going to be dictated by our key matchup of the series, which is going to be our support matchup here between Huhi and Core JJ. Now, you're not really going to be finding a better support matchup in the playoffs than this, at least in terms of the LCS, and I'm really, really excited to see these two players play off. Every single time they do, they both try to take over the game, and it is a lot of fun to look at. Look at the stats that who he was able to put out this year. Number 1 in XP at 10, 4th in KP percentage, 2nd in vision score per minute, 2nd in goal percentage, 2nd in KDA. Was really, really good for 100 Thieves this year. A lot of what 100 Thieves did this year bled through their bottom lane. And FBI and Huhi have really been a central part of that. And ironically, on the other end, you have Core JJ, who just really hasn't been that. He's 8th in XP per minute, 7th in gold percentage, but you look at his KP percentage, he's still making plays. He's still being active on the map. It's just not typically through Hansama and through that bottom lane. So it is a little bit interesting to see this matchup happen because I think both of them are active, but both of them are very good laners as well. I think whichever one of these players is able to kind of generate an advantage for their team, whether that be their jungler, whether that be their bot laner, whether that be their mid laner, whichever one of these players is able to generate the bigger lead for their team should be the winning side in this matchup. Huhi has done a phenomenal job in this matchup. Throughout the year, they've gone 1-1, but in their recent matchup in Week 8, Huhi did a phenomenal job of being able to capitalize in team fights and be able to team fight a little bit better than Core JJ, but we all know that Core's roaming ability is second to none in the early game, so it's going to be very interesting to see how these two players match up, and I really do think that, depending on how these two go into each other, I think that that could really determine who comes out on top in this very interesting series. But you've got a lot of funneling pieces here. Someday Bwipo is going to be a treat. Santorin Closer's always good. Abadage Bjergsen's phenomenal for the storyline. And then FBI Hansama is going to be great in terms of just raw mechanical skill. Huhi and Core JJ are just the icing on top. This is one of the most interesting matchups that we are going to be getting in all of the LCS this playoffs. I am very, very stoked to be able to get it this early, and I'm just excited, and I really hope this goes to 5 games. All right, now that we've talked about our 2-3 matchup, it's finally time to talk about our number 1 seeded team here in the LCS and their second round matchup here as we have the number 1 seeded Evil Geniuses taking on the number 5 seeded Cloud9. Cloud9 obviously beating CLG in the first round in 5 games. You can make a real case that they weren't even the better team in that series, but they do move on. They do get here to play EG just as I predicted, and in this matchup, it's incredibly back and forth in terms of just where the power lies. Obviously, I talked about this in the first round as well for Cloud9, but it's got to be true again for the second round. This team runs so much through their jungle position and so much through what Blabber wants to do, whether it be super aggressive plays invading in the early game that he needs someone like Jensen to back him up on, or just playing around objectives, making sure that Berserker and Sven aren't overextending and playing around Blabber so that they can make sure to team fight if necessary. Pretty much everything Cloud9 does is around Blabber and around this jungle position. And that makes it an incredibly interesting matchup for Evil Geniuses because EG has the MVP in their jungle position here in Inspired. And so it's definitely going to be intriguing to see Blabber go into Inspired. They split 1 apiece in the regular season here, which is good, I think, overall for Cloud9. To see that they were able to take a game off of EG is pretty huge. EG was one of those teams that just at times was not able to beat some of the better teams in the league, which is definitely a little concerning. But in terms of performance, there's really not a lot of teams more talented than like the trio of Inspired, Danny, Vulcan, at least how they've been this year. One of the teams that can go up against that trio, though, is Blabber, Berserker, Sven. A very intriguing jungle bot matchup. We know bot lane has been ginormous in this current meta. Whichever bot laner typically gets ahead is the one that wins the game. And jungle is often the reason that happens. And so it's going to be very interesting to see if Inspired and Blabber take a lot of resources for themselves, or if they invest in some of their late game carries here. Danny, a phenomenal, probably the best late game carry in the region. Vulcan, also a really good team fighter, but a really good laner as well. Berserker in that similar vein, like a very good late game team fighter, very good laner. And Sven has really been willing to push the limits of the lane, support position, being able to pull out, obviously, the Yuumi and the Lulu, but we saw a lot of Ashe support come out from him in the playoffs. So very, very intriguing matchup there. One matchup I am a little bit worried about when it comes for EG is actually the top lane matchup. Obviously, Impact is a very good player, but I think you can make a real case that Impact had one of his worst splits in a very long time in summer, multiple times being taken advantage of. I think for the most part, he was fine this year, but there were some games that he just got absolutely blasted by good top laners like Bwipo, like Fudge in the game that Cloud9 won. It was a little bit concerning, and Fudge honestly is having a very good year switching back to the top lane. This could be a place where Cloud9 is able to generate some leads here if Impact is playing a little bit over-aggressive. You see a lot of the Gangplank, a lot of the Gwen coming out from him. I think if you were to see more of the Sejuani, the Ornn, the Gnar, some of these more passive picks, I would expect them to kind of index away from that lane, but you know, I think Fudge is definitely someone who would be willing to play these more aggressive lanes and just kind of try to skill check Impact throughout the series, and I think that could be something that is in favor of Cloud9, definitely with how things go, but really, what we're talking about is all of the other things. The big storyline here that we have to talk about is our key matchup of the series, which is, of course, the mid lane matchup. Jojo Pyun versus Jensen in the mid lane, and this is the storyline and the key matchup of the series, mostly because of just the context surrounding this matchup. Obviously, EG going with Jojo, but not going with Jensen in the preseason. Obviously, a lot of rumors that Jensen was supposed to be the mid laner for Evil Geniuses here to complete this more, I don't know, veteran experienced lineup, you know, building around Danny, but they go with the inexperienced Jojo Pyun, and he's absolutely paid off for them in the regular season. I think he's maybe been a little overhyped. Obviously, I had him as my second team all-pro mid laner. I think they were unanimously first team or close to it in LCS voting. I don't hate that pick. I just don't know necessarily if I think he was that impactful. I think some of the stats maybe back that up. He was last in damage per gold percentage, last in damage percentage, only 7th in KP percentage. Like, he was a very good player, and he had some very good lane phases, but at the end of the day, he wasn't the most, like, game-winning or game-losing, I think, for EG, especially down the stretch. Jensen, on the other hand, really was bad for the beginning of the year for Cloud9 and really started to step it up towards the back half, where I think really learned how to play around Blabber just a tad bit better. This is Blabber's team, and I think Jensen had some time getting used to that. But recently, he's been pulling out picks like the Orianna, pulling out picks like the classic Zillion, and I think it's really helped him a lot to be able to enable Blabber in the jungle. Obviously, playing those more aggressive picks for Jensen has kind of been his staple in his career, but we know he can pull out these more passive, supportive picks that want to play around the more macro game. He's first in KP percentage in terms of all mid laners in the region. That should really show you how willing he is to sack his own lane in order to make plays across the map. But this is a really intriguing matchup, not just because I really do believe that, you know, it's going to be intriguing to see which of these two get their advantage, but the storyline surrounding it makes it so it was a pretty easy choice for my key matchup of the series. But it's going to be very interesting. EG's definitely had trouble taking down some of the better teams in the league, and Cloud9 certainly has not been shy about facing some of the better teams. So this is going to be an incredibly interesting matchup. I do think this could go either way. I'm just really excited to watch it. Like I said, I hope 100 Thieves and TL go 5 games. I hope EG and C9 also go 5 games. Both of these series, I think, have the potential to do that, and I would love, love, love another weekend of some great LCS action. Alright, that is going to do it for my LCS Losers Round 1 overview, analysis, all 10 games we went over. We previewed the upper bracket EGC9, 100 Thieves TL. Let's go over some of those predictions on what we are expecting from those series. I actually predicted both of these series to be happening in my preseason prediction, or my pre-bracket predictions, and I'm not switching up what I thought here. I think EG should still be able to take care of C9. I do think it'll be close 4 or 5 games, but EG should be the better team, and they should be able to handle it, and I think Inspired is going to be able to take care of Blabber in that matchup. And then for 100 Thieves TL, I think 100 Thieves has just got a lot of momentum on their side right now. I think a lot of TL is just really needing to get confidence under their belt right now, and obviously the FlyQuest series definitely helped with that, and I think it could make it incredibly interesting, but if I had to predict, it's going to be 100 Thieves. I think it goes 5 games either way. Could go 100 Thieves, could very well go to Team Liquid. If this goes to Team Liquid in 3, I wouldn't be all that surprised. If this goes 100 Thieves in 3, I wouldn't be all that surprised. Whatever outcome happens here, I'm really not going to be all that surprised, because both of these teams can be significantly better than the other on any given day. Most of that is just because of TL's ridiculous inconsistency. They might show up and be the best team in the LCS and crush 100 Thieves, or they might show up and be, you know, the inconsistent team that was losing games to bad teams throughout the year and get crushed by 100 Thieves. So it's definitely going to be an interesting matchup. I could see it going either way, but if I had to pick, I'm going to go 100 Thieves right now. Both series are going to be a lot of fun to watch, and I'm really, really excited for them, but that's it for this episode of the LCS Recap. If you guys enjoyed, please go ahead and leave a like. It really does mean a lot for the channel. Hit the subscribe button if you want to see more of this content. Obviously, I'm posting pretty much every single day with all these playoffs going on, so if you guys are enjoying what I'm doing, hit the subscribe button to get more good action. Let me know down in the comment section below, too, what you think of the upcoming series. Who do you think is going to win between EG and C9? Who do you think is going to win between 100 Thieves and TL? Love to hear your opinions on all of that down in the comment section below, but with all that being said, I hope you all are having a great day. I hope you continue to have a great day, and I will see you all later.